I don't want America to be turned into Syria. I don't. If you want to turn America into the Middle East, please stay there. You already have it. Hey there, friends, fans, and foes of Dad Saves America. John Popola here, and I wanted to take this Friday to talk about an issue that's in the news that's at the intersection of a lot of things we talk about on this channel. Free speech, American values, and how to think about them, how to defend them, especially at the extreme edges. And that is especially difficult when it comes to the case of Mahmoud Khalil.
Supporters and legal advocates outside a Manhattan courthouse rallying for the release of a pro-Palestinian activist. This after a hearing just ended over his potential deportation. We're talking about this man, Mahmoud Khalil, a legal U.S. resident with a green card who protested against Israel's war in Gaza at Columbia University. Now, immigration agents arrested Khalil over the weekend and sent him to a detention center in Louisiana. That arrest is sparking demonstrations in many parts of the country today.
So before we get into the details of what the Trump administration is trying to do and why, I want to get you up to speed on, as best I can, who Mr. Khalil is, what he's participated in, and why he would come under this kind of scrutiny and potential deportation as a green card holder.
Pro-Palestinian protesters clashing with the NYPD at Barnard College. Officers with riot gear holding the line, forcing the group off campus. Cops say they responded to a bomb threat at the Milstein Center. It's here where demonstrators took over the building for several hours, demanding the college reinstate students who were recently disciplined.
This is at the Barnard College, which is a part of Columbia University, an all-female part. And there's a lot of takes on the Middle East conflict, but one thing that I find continually bizarre is that young women, of all people, have come to the side of the Palestinians, the side in the conflict, fundamentally, who are the harshest on women's rights. And I'm not just talking about the Palestinian territories, but the Islamic world more generally. It is weird to see all these young, mostly American, college young women dressing up like Intifada fighters. It's not a great strategy for wanting to win the American public to your cause. Let me just tell you that right now. And as a parent, if my daughter went off to college and was dressing like a terrorist, I would immediately pull her out of the school or cut the funding. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
The sit-in, relaunched after the administration, in the words of the demonstrators, sabotaged negotiations and locked down campus last week. This all stems after multiple Barnard students faced disciplinary action for breaking into Hamilton Hall at Columbia University last year. Barnard expelled one student and suspended the other, according to a pro-Palestinian group at Columbia. That same group claims Barnard expelled two other students for disrupting a History of Modern Israel class. Barnard's president called protesters mass disruptors who interfere with classes, adding those actions cannot be tolerated.
This was inside a building called Milstein Center. It's the library, sort of a student center on the campus of Barnard, where a group of pro-Palestinian protesters had entered and had taken over the place.
Again, I do think that honestly, so much of this on the college campuses is a party. I mean, literally a party. And here is our man. This is recent. Mahmoud. So what's going on here? Is he just part of the group? Why is he getting targeted? The reason he is being targeted is because he has actually been a lead participant, a negotiator, a front man for a group of students called the Columbia United Apartheid Divest. Basically, they have a list of demands, which I'll get to, but he has been a leading role in this movement since the response to the 10/7 attacks in Israel in 2023. This hasn't merely been peaceful protesting and assembly. It has gotten into a wider range of activities and behaviors, including destruction of property and disruption of the actual school's operation.
Pro-Palestinian demonstrators doubled down on the university. By mid-afternoon, dozens of students were gathered outside Hamilton Hall, determined to block any attempt by the administration to reclaim the building.
Our demands are divestment, disclosure, and amnesty. The university hasn't been adequately addressing those demands, instead proposing further discipline.
It happened in the middle of the night. Protesters smashed windows and stormed the building. They barricaded themselves inside using locks and furniture after allowing 3 university staffers to leave. No one was injured.
Our man has been at the center of this. He has been a leader in it. And he's also been associated, let's say, as part of this group with some pretty nasty characters.
Tonight, Columbia has banned student protest leader Kamani James from its campus after comments he made online about Jewish people. The video was taken back in January. It surfaced earlier this week and reveals James said that Zionists don't deserve to live. He released a statement saying what he said was wrong, but it was edited without context.
Zionists don't deserve to live.
Kamani James is one of the student organizers of Columbia's encampment and has been negotiating with school leaders. But a resurfaced live stream they posted earlier this year shows James using disturbing language.
Be grateful that I'm not just going out and murdering Zionists.
Yeah, that's the stuff. That's be grateful I'm not going out and killing all the Jews. That's what's going on. And again, that guy that was saying that is right there behind Khalil, who is standing forward to speak on behalf of this group. So what is this group actually all about? Is it simply about the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which is a bloody tragedy and a disaster, and I actually don't think should be thought of as the centerpiece of this issue, even though it feels like it is? Okay, what is this group actually saying? What do they want? What do they believe? Is it simply about peace for the people of Gaza and an end to conflict and the death and murder and horrible nature of war itself? War is awful. What's happening to the innocent people of Gaza is horrible, as well as to the innocent Israelis. All of that's horrible. War sucks. If you're just anti-war, I can be with you. But that's not all they believe. And they actually wrote a kind of manifesto last year. And so I pulled it up and read it. And I want to just read an excerpt because it gives you a window into what this is really all about and why the composition of the protesters is exactly what you'd expect it is if you've been paying attention to our politics for the past several years and, for that matter, decade. We are committed to creating a multi-generational, intersectional, and accessible space dedicated to fighting for abolition, transnational feminism. Yep, you hear that? Yep. Islamo transnational feminism. I know all about that one. That's a real thing. That's not completely made up. Anti-capitalism, decolonization, and also to combating anti-blackness, queer phobia. Again, maybe you should take this to Iran instead of the United States, where our biggest banks fly queer flags every June. Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. We keep each other safe. We do not believe that prisons, police, profit over people, militarism, war, colonialism, or imperialism will keep us safe. We reject the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency's weaponization of the United States' racist immigration laws to prevent our international comrades, giving away the game there, and peers from speaking up. We believe in the right of self-determination, land back, and the right of return from Palestine to Turtle Island. So what does that all mean? What does that word salad of woke gobbledygook actually mean? Well, in an Instagram post that's gone viral, and I had to basically get off Twitter because I think it was deleted by the organization, they were a little more pointed. We are Westerners fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization. We stand in full solidarity with every movement for liberation in the global South. And liberation here is defined by the prior sentence. Our intifada is an internationalist one. We are fighting for nothing less than the liberation of all people. We reject every genocidal eugenicist regime that seeks to undermine the personhood of the colonized. As the fascism ingrained in the American consciousness becomes ever more explicit and irrefutable, we seek community and instruction from militants in the global South who have been on the front lines in the fight against tyranny and domination which undergird the imperialist world order. And then a by blob Cholby, revolution must continue. This is the group. This is the organization that this relatively recent immigrant to the United States who went to our most prestigious universities and has been a front for, has been a leading voice for. This is what, at least in association, he and his friends are about. Let me just say this when it comes to eradicating Western civilization. I don't want that. I like Western civilization. I think that the founding principles of Western civilization are good, and I also think they are the founding principles of the United States. But I do understand, or at least I can put myself in Mr. Khalil's shoes and others like him. If you grew up in the Middle East in the past 100 years, you are looking at who's dropping bombs on your region. You are. And you're looking at Western powers playing proxy wars and various other foreign policy strategery and saying, I don't like this. I don't like watching people die in my community. As an individual, I get it. If you look at the history of America and our role in the Middle East, it is fraught, to say the least. We funded the Mujahideen during the Cold War. We helped to overthrow the democratically elected ruler of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, in the 1950s and gave rise to, well, frankly, the Shah and then the Ayatollah Khomeini. This has been acknowledged. This is a fact. We have played both sides in Iran versus Iraq, funding both, and then subsequently invaded and overthrew the guy that used to be our ally. We are a mess when it comes to what we've done in the Middle East. And we have obviously picked a very strong side with Israel versus the West Bank and Gaza. I am more sympathetic to Israel on this, but I understand that if you are Palestinian, you think we are the great Satan. I get it. You can argue whether any one or all of that has been sort of net good or net bad for the foreign policy interests of the United States. But if you're just an individual living in one of these countries, not participating in global politics, and just seeing what's happening, wanting to eradicate the people doing this can at least be understood. It can be made sense of. And I think that those of us that want to be critical of the movement that Mr. Khalil is a part of need to recognize that, need to take responsibility for the fact that that is part of the story here. That doesn't mean that if you're a, let's say, Greenwich, Connecticut born elite going to Columbia who just wants to feel good and be part of some social justice movement, that you are justified in throwing your lot in with what is ultimately a kind of radical totalitarian ideology. That ain't right. That's not good. And that is why I do believe fundamentally that what Mr. Khalil is allying with is bad. And I also want to say that the fact that the United States has been playing foreign policy games in the Middle East and around the world doesn't mean that no one in the Middle East or anywhere else has lost all responsibility for their own countries. This is complicated stuff. I am neither in the blame America last or blame America first camp. It's complicated. So now you know what's been going on. What is the Trump administration seeking to do? Well, we can start with President Trump, whose Truth Social post, as usual, was not subtle. Following my previous signed executive orders, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it. Many are not students, they are paid agitators. We will find, apprehend, and deport these terrorist sympathizers from our country, never to return again. If you support terrorism, including the slaughtering of innocent men, women, and children, your presence is contrary to our national and foreign policy interests, and you are not welcome here. We expect every one of America's colleges and universities to comply. Thank you. This is the world we're in, where these things are entirely adjudicated in public, in posts like this. One thing I think is fundamentally upsetting about this for me is that he is a green card holder and he does deserve due process of law. And I think the president, by pushing this kind of language out, to some extent automatically starts to damage that a little bit. He's sullying the waters. But I understand. I understand where he's coming from, and he and his cabinet have further articulated in different ways where they're coming from. I think Marco Rubio actually has made perhaps the strongest argument.
When you come to the United States as a visitor, which is what a visa is, which is how this individual entered this country, as a visitor's visa, okay, you are here as a visitor. We can deny you that visa. We can deny you that, but if you tell us when you apply, hi, I'm trying to get into the United States on a student visa. I am a big supporter of Hamas, a murderous, barbaric group that kidnaps children, that teenage girls, that takes hostages, that allows them to die in captivity, that returns more bodies than live hostages. If you tell us that you are in favor of a group like this, and if you tell us when you apply for your visa, and by the way, I intend to come to your country as a student and rile up all kinds of anti-Jewish student, anti-Semitic activities, I intend to shut down your universities. If you told us all these things when you applied for a visa, we would deny your visa. I hope we would.
He is correct about this, and I'm going to get to the actual paperwork you have to fill out to both become a green card holder and to naturalize. And let me just give you a preview. You'll get denied if you answer yes to a bunch of questions that might surprise you.
If you actually end up doing that, once you're in this country on such a visa, we will revoke it. And if you end up having a green card, not citizenship, but a green card as a result of that visa while you're here in those activities, we're going to kick you out. It's as simple as that. This is not about free speech. This is about people that don't have a right to be in the United States to begin with. No one has a right to a student visa. No one has a right to a green card, by the way. So when you apply for a student visa, or any visa to enter the United States, we have a right to deny you for virtually any reason. But I think being a supporter of Hamas and coming into our universities and turning them upside down and being complicit in what are clearly crimes of vandalization, complicit in shutting down learning institutions. There are kids at these schools that can't go to class. You pay all this money to these high-priced schools that are supposed to be of great esteem, and you can't even go to class. You're afraid to go to class because these lunatics are running around with covers on their face, screaming terrifying things. If you told us that's what you intended to do when you came to America, we would have never let you in. And if you do it once you get in, we're going to revoke it and kick you out.
This is probably close to the strongest argument that the administration has made publicly. It is noteworthy that the Hamas support gets targeted first and foremost, Hamas/Palestinian, and that gets conflated as well. Is Mr. Khalil a supporter of Hamas, or is he a supporter of the Palestinian people's cause? He was actually born in Syria. He's an Algerian citizen, and he has a U.S. green card, but he is of Palestinian descent. So it's understandable why he would be motivated to advocate for Palestinians. I get that. That is protected speech in the United States. And I think that if that was all he was doing, this would be an easy argument for me. If all he was doing was saying, I want to bring about an end to the war in Gaza, I want to advocate for the Palestinian people, that would be one thing. But it's more complicated than that, as I've already pointed out. Just to be clear, when it comes to the Palestinians versus Hamas, the organization that Mr. Khalil has been a frontman for made it pretty explicit. This is from the Wall Street Journal. In October 2024, Quad formalized its support for Hamas and again celebrated the October 7th, 2023 massacre. In a statement revoking an apology the group had made for the remarks of member Kamani James, that's the gentleman that was saying he could barely contain his desire to murder people, that Zionists don't deserve to live, the group said that an apology didn't represent Quad's values or political lines. The group added, "We support liberation by any means necessary, including armed resistance." So I don't know how many more actions this organization has to take to declare itself fundamentally an enemy of the United States and the entire West. They have said as much, literally. So we're not just talking about Middle Eastern politics and protest here. There is a bigger picture. All right, so here's Tom Homan from the administration making, let's just say, a weaker argument.
We consider them a national security threat. When you're on campus and they say, and I hear freedom of speech, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. Can you stay in a movie theater and yell fire? Can you slander somebody verbally? Free speech has limitations, but when you go to a college campus, you incite protesting and locking down and taking over buildings and damaging property and handing out leaflets for Hamas, who is a terrorist organization. Coming to this country either on a visa or becoming a resident alien is a great privilege. But there are rules associated with that. You might be able to get away with that stuff in the last administration, but you won't under this administration.
So much more dismissive of the free speech rights of a green card holder. And I think that is rightly worrisome. What's the opposing perspective here? Well, let's start with the defense attorney for Mr. Khalil.
Mr. Khalil's detention has nothing to do with security. It is only about repression. the United States government has taken the position that it can arrest, detain, and seek to deport a lawful permanent resident exclusively because of his peaceful, constitutionally protected activism. In this case, activism in support of Palestinian human rights and an end to the genocide in Gaza.
Now again, his organization at least has made far broader arguments than that.
The government takes the position that because the Secretary of State finds his dissent unacceptable or contrary to U.S. foreign policy, he can be deported. As Ramzi suggested, it's largely unprecedented, save for ugly historical precedents, including the Red Scare and McCarthyism. That's what we're talking about.
So fundamentally, he's saying it's unprecedented. But what he didn't say is that it's actually unlawful. That's an important thing to note in the way he's describing what's going on here. There are plenty of other advocates for Mr. Khalil's case, including somebody I deeply respect, Glenn Greenwald, who I think has been among the most staunch defenders of freedom of speech across the board in very nonpartisan ways.
I'm not sure where I stand here today, Glenn, but I know you look at this and you think many on the right have all of a sudden abandoned their defense of free speech.
Oh, there's no question that they have. I mean, this is what happens when you're actually a principled free speech advocate instead of one who only objects to censorship when it's your political allies who are being targeted, which is that a lot of people say they believe in free speech, except when it comes to the ideas they most hate, which they want silence.
I just want to say this point he's making here is really profound. It is almost the most profound point about this issue. Free speech is never actually really all that popular. It is always an extremely minority position to be truly principled and as diehard as Glenn is when it comes to free speech. There is always a breaking point for just about everyone in which suddenly that speech is not okay. And maybe I'm guilty of this too. Let's find out.
I just want to make one crucial point, which is you had said people on the far left, like Rashida Tlaib, believe that legal residents in the United States have the right of free speech. That is an indisputable proposition that the Supreme Court has for 200 years affirmed. And just imagine if that weren't the case.
What Glenn is saying here is that freedom of speech rights and essentially no consequences for First Amendment exercise is unequivocally the law of the land through all court precedent. And this is where I think Glenn, in my attempts to try to understand this, is maybe overplaying his hand when it comes to legal residents and non-citizens.
Mean that if, say, like Jordan Peterson, who's not an American citizen but is always in the United States, were to go and denounce the Biden White House, the Biden White House could arrest him and deport him, and nobody could object on constitutional grounds because he's a foreigner. Of course, people legally in the United States have the right of free speech, and we don't want to create any kind of a framework, especially on college campuses, as the American right has been saying, where because of the argument that minority groups are endangered by certain views, black people or trans people or whatever, we have to censor those views in order to create a safe environment. And that's exactly what so many American conservatives out of great loyalty to Israel are now doing.
I think there's a lot of elements of truth in what he just said, including the notion that one of the fundamental problems is the sense of safety on the part of students by speech. This is a dangerous, slippery slope, and the arguments in favor of feeling safe because of feelings by speech are not tenable. I do not support that. You might be made uncomfortable by a large protest against an issue you care about. That's part of living in a free society. That's what it means to live in America with our uniquely well-protected, though not perfectly so, freedom of speech rights for American citizens. And that's where the argument here starts to get more difficult. Another example of arguments made is from our friends at FIRE. This is probably the leading organization in favor of free speech and defending it, especially on college campuses. They've made a public statement about this case, and I just want to read one excerpt that I think is most operable. There are millions of people lawfully present in the United States without citizenship. The administration's actions will cause them to self-censor rather than risk government retaliation. This is the fundamental cost that FIRE is worried about, that these actions will create a chilling effect, a kind of Maoist cultural chill. Lawful permanent residents and students on visas will fear a knock on the door simply for speaking their minds. So one question we have to ask ourselves is that okay? Seriously, if you're here as a could-be American, do we as citizens want you to feel any reservation about advocating for the eradication of Western civilization, which would eradicate the United States itself? We are a very fundamental, you could say we are peak Western civilization. Our Constitution, which is the thing that governs what we are as a nation, we're not just a geography, we're a constitutional republic. If you want to eradicate Western civilization, maybe I want your speech to be chilled. If you're not a citizen, if you're coming here to mess around, this is where it gets hard for me. And I'm not sure I can leave you with an answer, but let me dig into some of the parts of this that the strongest advocates for free speech, I think, are somewhat misrepresenting. Let's start with green cards. What is that? That is fundamentally could be permanent legal residency, but it is not citizenship. You are still considered technically an alien as a green card holder. And so it turns out, number one, that in applying for your green card, you have to actually answer a couple of questions. And some of them, I think, might be a little bit awkward for Mr. Khalil and people like him. So let's look specifically here on page 16, security-related questions. Have you engaged in any activity whose purpose includes opposing, controlling, or overthrowing the U.S. government by force, violence, or other unlawful means while in the United States? This would have to be proved, but it certainly seems like Mr. Khalil's organization would have to check yes. Down at number 45, do you intend to engage in any activity that could endanger the welfare, safety, or security of the United States? This is a bigger stretch, like what can one man do? But maybe eradicate the West? Maybe. Going on to the next page, number 52. Have you ever been a member of or in any way affiliated with the Communist Party or any totalitarian party in the United States or abroad? I would say that Hamas is a totalitarian party. It is a totalitarian regime. That is how it treats its people. That is one of the great tragedies of this entire thing when it comes to the Middle East and Gaza, is that the actually peaceful people of Gaza have been living under a totalitarian military regime that also enriches itself and lives off in other lands, accumulating billions of dollars while sending 18-year-olds to die. But does he need to say yes to this? I think there's a chance he might. Would he have had to check these boxes at the time he maybe filled out this form, or is it only after the fact, as Marco Rubio pointed out, that suddenly now he has to check all these scary boxes because of the stuff he's done since he's got here? I don't know. I don't know his whole past. One thing we do know, though, is that he believed that he might be on shaky ground. According to the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Khalil understood his legal risks. In October 2024, he said, quote, "I am here on a foreign visa. That's why for the past 6 months, I've barely appeared on the media." He told the BBC that Colombia briefly suspended him in April 2024, but quickly reversed itself, which allowed him to retain his student visa. Mahmoud understood that he was on shaky ground for his legal status if he very publicly said what he believed and put his face out there in the world. One of the aspects of law is, do you know what the law is? And at least in this instance, he appeared to know. So how else should we understand what's going on here? When you go to the USCIS website and look at the green card pages, you will find that there are both rights and responsibilities specific to green card holders. I want to point out a couple in particular that speak to where Secretary Rubio is going and why the arguments that there's an open and shut case in favor of Khalil being free to do what he's been doing isn't crystal clear. Number one, you have the right to live permanently in the United States, provided you do not commit any acts that would make you removable under immigration law. This is probably the most important part. You are indeed protected by all laws of the United States, your state residence, and your local jurisdictions. So the notion that he is protected by the constitutional framework is mostly true, but with the proviso that you have to layer in immigration law because they are an immigrant, not a citizen. One other piece, you are expected to support the democratic form of government. That's an important one. Our law, our founders, our immigration law for the entirety of the country has understood we want people who will keep the country the kind of free, constitutional, Western, liberal, democratic, capitalist society that it was meant to be, that it is designed to be. And if you're not, you're in trouble. Where might he get in trouble? With immigration law. This is one of the pieces of the puzzle that ties it all together. There are several sections of the Immigration Act that call out potential problems for Mr. Khalil and people like him who are here as non-citizens advocating for the destruction of the West or associating with groups that want that. Number one, this is inadmissible aliens, those who endorse or espouse terrorist activity or persuade others to endorse or espouse terrorist activity or support a terrorist organization. Hamas is indeed a terrorist organization. I don't love the designation terrorist. I think it is overly broad. I think it can be defined in ways that can get scary real quick. And it's part of the sort of post 9/11 war on terror regime that I think has made America worse. But this is the law. Another section, an alien whose entry or proposed activities in the United States, the Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe would have potential serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States is inadmissible. Are these protests actually causing foreign policy problems or consequences? It's not crystal clear. But this is maybe the exact statute that Marco Rubio is calling out when he says that. And finally, and I think this is also part of the problem, immigrant membership in a totalitarian party. Any immigrant who is or has been a member or affiliated with the communist or any other totalitarian party or subdivision or affiliate thereof, domestic or foreign, is inadmissible. So his student group falls into this category. The claim that there is no grounds for the Secretary of State to utilize this power that the Congress has granted to deport this man and others like him is at least debatable. Does that mean I think we should deport this guy and others like him? To be perfectly honest, I don't know. My inclination is no. And the reason for that is I deeply, fundamentally believe in our freedom of speech, not just legal protections, but the culture of our freedom of speech. The culture that we can tolerate strong, peaceful words in protest. Words aren't violence. Silence isn't violence. Only violence is violence. And so the notion that hurty words should be disallowed, including ones that make crazy claims, well, frankly, I have a real hard time with that. And the other piece of the puzzle that, if you take that seriously, is the fact that, frankly, his views are more or less shared by a plurality of college professors who are citizens here in the US. And I think that is actually the bigger problem. I think Mr. Khalil is a symptom of something far deeper and scarier. And it may be strategic and even justifiable to take a harder look at non-citizens in this regard. That's why I'm not absolutely super confident that the right thing to do is to keep this guy here. The right thing to do might be to kick him out. And this raises some fundamental first principles questions that I think we need to grapple with, because there's some things going on in our society that should trouble all of us as parents, as Americans. And one of them is demonstrated by the elite young people dressing up like terrorists and parading around our college campuses smashing stuff. And that is, our institutions have become a kind of fifth column in our society. What do I mean by that? I mean that literally you will find his opinion more or less mirrored in a majority of places around academia and beyond. And I think what that has done, that has played the maybe primary role in smashing pride in the country for Americans, by Americans. So several recent polls have pointed this out, and they are worth lingering on. This one is from the Wall Street Journal that shows that patriotism from 1998 until the present has completely collapsed into the 30s for all adults. Religion, having children, community involvement, they've all collapsed. The only thing that's gone up basically is greed, which is not a great sign. We're becoming a nihilistic, hedonistic society. Thumbs down. But that's not all. Axios did a poll similar and narrowed in on young people, 18 to 34. And what they found is chilling and instructive. So what they found is that in 2013, 85% of those aged 18 to 29 said they were extremely or very proud to be an American. 2013. Keep in mind that 2013 is in the aftermath of the Great Recession, where the economy still sucked. And the war on terror had already ground on for so long that more or less every American felt that the Iraq War was a giant disaster and that our military adventures were really turning sour. So if the fact that 85% of our kids and young adults were proud or very proud of the country says something. Where is it today? Get ready. 18%. 18% of 18 to 34-year-olds say they're proud or very proud to be an American. I mean, what are we supposed to do with that? How are we going to fight and win a war if we really need to really win a real one that really matters? We've launched a lot of wars that were a bad idea, but it's not impossible that we might have to fight a real war. And having less than 20% of our young people be proud of the country, that sounds like the fall of civilization type of territory to me. It also points to the collapse of the rest of our institutions. If you don't love the country, and if you don't believe in the country, and if you're not proud to be in the country, I don't see how anything else works. Money doesn't work without trust. Nothing does. And I think this is the problem that we are facing in the modern world and in the West in particular. There's a couple questions I want to leave you with to think about. Number one, does a government have the right to control who comes in and out of the country that it controls, that is, its jurisdiction? Does it have sovereignty? I think everyone aside from my understandable libertarian anarchists would say yes. It is sort of the definition of having a country. Our Constitution, fundamentally, is about protecting we the people of the United States to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. But it is for the people of the United States. That is what it's for. It's right there in the documents. Every country on this planet has a different form of government, a different culture, different norms, different rules. Here in the US, we like that because we call it federalism. We have 50 states, 50 laboratories of democracy to choose from. I moved from New Jersey to Texas for a whole host of reasons, including lower taxes. Why isn't that also good for the planet? Why isn't it good to have lots of different countries with different worldviews? If you want Sharia law, which is going to be incompatible with all that other stuff in the gobbledygook blob of commie nonsense that this organization and countless others on college campuses talk about, where, oh, let's have queers for Palestine, but please don't throw our queers off the roof in Palestine. Please don't do that. You've got plenty of countries to choose from if that's the regime you want to live under. You want to be in Iran? Be my guest. Have a blast. You want to go participate in the reconstruction of Syria? Have at it. You've got a lot of choice. I don't want America to be turned into Syria. I don't. I don't want America to be turned into any part of the Middle East. And some people do. And I don't want those people here. and that's just the way it is. That's kind of where my gut is at the end of the day. If you want to turn America into the Middle East, please stay there. You already have it. And I think that is the challenge that we face in the West more broadly. We have lost the plot on what we are. We have lost the plot on the values that underpin the rights that we take for granted. And therefore, we set ourselves up for this paradox where people who don't like our rights, who don't believe in them fundamentally, are willing to use them against us. And the slippery slope of reacting to that and becoming the thing we despise is very real. But how we defend the rights we cherish when toleration of the enemies of them is part of it, that's really, really hard. I don't know. All I know is when I look across the pond to Europe, when I look at the censoriousness, when I look at the cultural breakdown taking place, when I look at the impacts of Islamic immigration, frankly, in countries in Europe and what it has done to those communities, and the crimes being committed and then covered up in places like the UK in the name of tolerance and intersectional politics, it gives me pause. As much of a free speech advocate as I am, it gives me pause. And so I thought I'd leave us with a clip from a movie whose final speech, I think, was intended to be seen as an act of villainy. But as I age, I increasingly feel may be at least a little bit heroic.
Deep down in places you don't talk about at parties. You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. We use words like honor, code, loyalty. We use these words as the backbone of a life spent defending something. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide, and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, I suggest you pick up a weapon and stand a post. Either way, I don't give a damn what you think you are entitled to.
I hope this has been helpful. It has been mostly a bunch of back and forth nuance, but that's what we're called to try to understand. And I hope this can help you see where the arguments are here. This is big, important stuff. It's really big, important stuff for our kids because it is shaping their education. And if we aren't paying attention to it, we will end up wishing that this guy was on the wall for us. Have a great weekend.